Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to span the range of the first 14 verses. That's the first half of Solomon's 25th chapter in the book of Proverbs. And the authorship is attributed, the composition is attributed to Solomon, but the compilation is identified as Hezekiah in the first verse. We'll get to that when we get to that. We just want to briefly review what we read in the antecedent section. So the 24th chapter consists of two things. It consists of sayings 19, the numbers 19 through 30, and the 30 wise sayings identified as early as the 22nd chapter. And then there's 5 additional sayings, and it's at the 23rd verse of the 34th chapter. So the first section is almost twice as long, but not quite as the second. But we did the lesson last, so we're going to review. There are 2 of these 5 sayings which pertain to diligence and or laziness, and the 27th verse is the 3rd saying. Now, much of these sayings are different lengths in verses, so this is one saying that is a 1, as is its predecessor. 26 and 27 are both sayings, but the saying that we're going to read after is several verses. But the 27th verse reads, "Prepare your work outside, and make it fit for yourself in the field. Then you shall build your house." So the diligent man plans his work and works his plan. And they are prepared because they did it mentally before they're doing it physically. And this is the necessary order and proper approach to building a house, which would have been a home. So if you want to have a wife and children that you can feed, you're going to have to prepare your work outside, and you're going to have to make sure that you reap what you sow and really make the most of what property you have. The 5th and final saying, and then this marks the another distinct literary transition. "I passed by the field of the lazy, and by the vineyard of the man lacking heart, and see, it was all overgrown with thorns. Its surface was covered with nettles, and its stone wall was broken down." This is the consequence of laziness. When you are lazy, you are not mindful of your own store. Your comfort is your greater concern than your prosperity and welfare, so you will suffer accordingly if you're too lazy to take care of your field, and if you lack the heart to tend your vineyard, then it's going to be overrun and overgrown with thorns and nettles and everything else. And the stone wall, which is the barrier and security, which protects your property's borders from animals and intruders, is going to be, broken down as a state of the physical deterioration is going to be the result of your moral deterioration. So laziness is a moral failure, and is treated as such. "When I saw it, I applied my heart to it. I looked, and I received discipline. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and your poverty shall come progressing, and your need like an armed bandit." So there is a danger in even wasting a single day away in sleep, is because you get used to it, you get comfortable, and then before you know it, poverty is already upon you, and it's got you by the arm, it's got you by the chain, and it's got you by the balls, and there's nothing you can do about it. But there's something you could have done about it had you just cultivated the practices and disciplines and developed the virtue of discipline, which is working hard and working smart. If you want to succeed, you must do both. Now, the first verse of the 25th chapter, this is the actual lesson itself, reads, "These 2 are Proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied." So there are a total of 678 Proverbs in the book of Proverbs, start to finish, chapters 1 through 31. Yet in the 4th chapter of Kings, Solomon is credited with having composed 3,000 Proverbs. So this is what we have. This is what survives of his Proverbs. They're only a fraction, but what this verse seems to suggest is that these tail ends were not originally They were discovered and extracted by men in the employ of Hezekiah, his wise men, his scholars. And Solomon was the final king of the united monarchy, and then the kingdom split, largely because of his having succumbed to idolatry. And Hezekiah was perhaps the greatest post-Solomonic ruler in Jerusalem of all the descendants of David. He was perhaps the most prolific reformer. There was a revival and a reformation, whatever you want to call it, a spiritual awakening that took place during his reign, and he was also incidentally the first king of the total the northern kingdom of Israel. Left him, what was swallowed up by Assyria sometime during his reigns, and they came to his gates, but long story short, the angel of Yahweh slew 185,000 of them in a single night, and that left him the sole sovereign of a covenant nation, because the northern kingdom of Israel was no more. So the composition is Solomon's, but the compilation can be accredited to Hezekiah, without which these nuggets and treasures of wisdom, of Solomon's wisdom, would be lost. It is the esteem of Elohim to hide a matter, and the esteem of kings to search out a matter. Now, why would Elohim conceal or hide any truth, any mystery? And the answer is that his withholding revelation is in fact an act of mercy, because he only reveals in himself as much as you can responsibly respond to it. So it's necessary for him to remain hidden from the unbelieving world, and but what can be known of him can be revealed, and it's not necessarily searching out. I mean, you do have to take an initiative, but the whole thing, a personal initiative, an active agency, but the whole thing from start to finish, the truth emanates in and originates in Elohim, start to finish. The heavens for heights and the earth for depths, but the heart of kings is unsearchable. So Elohim is unsearchable, so too is Solomon's own heart, because he's, who can know it? Jeremiah describes the human heart as incomprehensible. Who can know it? Deceitful and desperately wicked. And Solomon says much the same thing here. The heart is unsearchable. It is incomprehensible. It is beyond it, and its dimensions and the depths thereof are deeper and more exceedingly profound than the heights of the heavens and the depths of the earth. So that gives you a physical foundation for the metaphor. Take away the dross from silver, and a vessel comes forth for the refiner. Take away the wicked from before the king, and his throne is established in righteousness. So much as dross comes away from silver through the burning process of a furnace, which burns and purifies and eliminates any dross, which is the ugly element that you don't want in silver, refined and extracted. But this is part of the refining process, much in the same way that a king who wants to refine and restore or reform his own court must eliminate the wicked from their presence, because the influences you surround yourself with, whether you are a king or a commoner, they will affect you. It's just a fact of human life. We are who we associate with and affiliate with. And if you are surrounding yourself by wicked and evil and even immature or ignorant influences, then your throne cannot be hoped or even helped to be established in righteousness, because these wicked men, what are they going to do? What do they know? Do not exalt yourself before a king, and do not stand in the place of great men. For it is better for him to say to you, 'Come up here,' than that you should be put lower before a noble whom your eyes have seen." So as a king, he would have hosted many guests, and he's writing from the vantage point of a king to, I guess this is to any reader, because it wouldn't have been necessarily fitting or appropriate for his son, who he explicitly identifies as the recipient of the message in this book as early as 1:8. But there were definite do's and don'ts for dining before a king. A meal with a king is not an ordinary meal, and it would be foolish to treat it as such. So don't clamor for yourself the greatest seat at the table. Don't brag about yourself, because it's better that the king recognize you and for the kingdom, that the king reach out and recognize you of his own initiative, and he will respond and reward you accordingly. Because if you exalt yourself, he's going to have to shame and humiliate you before a noble who outranks you. So this is probably for the commoner without the advantages of aristocratic privilege that he's writing to. "Do not go forth to strive in haste, for what would you do in the end when your neighbor has put you to shame?" So don't be rash, don't be impulsive, don't slow down. Think about where you're going, what you're doing, and why you're doing it. Because if you don't calculate the costs and the consequences before enacting them and undergoing them, then this is also framed as a question. So when your neighbor has put you to shame, and this connects to the 9th verse, "Plead your case with your neighbor himself, and do not disclose the secret of another, lest he who hears you put it back in shame, and your evil report is turned not back." Now this is, we just read that we're treating these as sayings now rather than reading them in the individual verses. So verse 8 and 10 all connect. And so the theme of neighbor, of course, bleeds, what would your neighbor have put you to shame? So the answer to that is to plead your case with your neighbor himself. Don't to drag him to court, but express your grievance and issues with him, and do it man to man, face to face, between friends, between neighbors. That is the neighborly thing to do. And no one likes a gossip. No one likes except gossips. Gossips kind of gravitate around gossips, but no one in their right frame of mind really respects it or admires a gossip queen or a drama junkie or a busybody, one who involves other people in other people's business, which are not only not their own, but really no one else's. So no good can come from being such a one, or even being with such a one. And you reap what you sow with gossip. So, if you step into that world, you're eventually going to be gossiped about. It's just one of the things. If you traffic in gossip, then you are going to be receiving gossip, and you will have a taste of your own medicine, and it's not pleasant. You will know how it is to be on the other end of defaming rumors and just smears and scurrilous, libelous claims. "A word spoken at the right time is like apples of gold and mountings of silver." This reminds me of something he says in the 15th chapter. The right word spoken to the right person at the right time in the right way, how good it feels. And here he compares it to apples of gold and mountings of silver. Apples, gold, and silver are all valuable. Apple, Israel was the apple of Yahweh's eye in Deuteronomy 32:11. And apples of gold and mountains of silver, we can imagine there was mountings of silver with apples of gold and in the artistic display, and that would have been comparable and equivalent to a word that is spoken at the right time by the right person with the right words in the right way and in the right demeanor and at the right timing. That all adds up to something that is the effective equivalent of apple, gold, and silver. A ring of gold and an ornament of fine gold is a wise one's reproof to an ear that hears. So speaking of gold, he connects it in the next verse. Ring of gold and ornaments of fine gold. Rings and ornaments were two of the things that were made by the refiners, the jewelers, the gold refiners, the blacksmiths, whatever you want to call them. They made gold rings and ornaments of gold, but this is its value was clearly, they were clearly valuable, at least financially, carnally, or in worldly currency, shall we say. But what it's likened to is a wise one's reproof to an ear that hears. Now, the natural man's ear does not want to hear reproof. They despise and discard correction and discipline. They don't like being told that they are wrong or that they are in error or they could stand in the way of proving. But discipline and to correct someone who is lost in ignorance and error is not an act of provocation or hostility. It is an act of love to reach out and to rescue those who are lost in ignorance and error. Now, a lot of our character defects and flaws might not be immediately visible to us, but that's where we could use a good friend to step in and tell us the things we could never figure out for our own. Like the cold of snow in time of harvest is a trustworthy angel to those who send him, for he refreshes the life of his master. Now, Israel's geography is unique. It experiences all four seasons: summer, spring, winter, fall. Not in those orders. I got the order wrong, but you get the point. And there's also mountains and there's Mediterranean beaches, so it's really a meshing of worlds within a one world. There's literally no country on the earth quite like it. And that is one of the reasons that the Bible has enjoyed a greater spread in reception than the Quran, because the Quran is written from a desert-dwelling people, and they're not gonna have words for snow that can convert the Eskimo, but everything that exists or can be experienced in any other country in the world pretty much can be experienced in Israel. And here it can also snow in their summer, which is unusual for us. I personally live in New England, United States, but it would have been a relief to have the hot desert sun beating on you and just have the relief of snow falling from the sky. And that forms the metaphor or the connection to a faithful messenger who is faithful to the ones who send him and faithful to give the message and spread the message and return the message and receive the message, because messengers in the ancient world, there was no instant communication. If you wanted to communicate with someone, you physically had to go in their presence and either speak to them or have something written to them if you wish to communicate them. There was no instant communication, so messengers were essential for the maintenance of empires and kingdoms, just to have someone who could go and exchange the message between one parties and the next. A lot revolved around that. And he has a refreshing effect on the life of his master. He brings him good news, which uplifts his spirit, and he sends him the news that is necessary for him to send in order to survive. Cloud and winds without rain is he who boasts of his gifts falsely. So this language is eerily reminiscent of what we read of in Jude, the 12th verse of the single chapter book of Jude, where he's comparing the false teachers as clouds without rains and a host of other unflattering natural analogies. But a cloud and wind without rain means it's just there, it's just useless, it's not beneficial, because rain is beneficial. Clouds exist to send the rain to replenish the earth, much as the messenger refreshes the life of the one who sends him, his master. But boasting of gifts falsely, now you can't, if you, I mean, this can be likened to either a spiritual, with the spiritual gifts. You can say you perform miracles, but that's a lie, and you are boasting falsely. To say you have healed someone or anything else would be a lie and a false boast, unless of course you have. So, but most people who say that type of stuff are boasting falsely, and boasting falsely is dishonest, and it misleads, and it puffs up, and it exalts the self, but seemingly at the expense of the truth. And the truth is non-negotiable and should not be compromised for illicit gain by any of us. That's all the time we have for today. That's the 14th verse of this 28 verse chapter. We'll pick up on the second half soon. Till then, take care until then. Bye-bye.